Have you ever wondered if your blood remembers more than you do? Not just the biological pulse that keeps you alive, but the deeper memory, ancestral, symbolic, ancient. Not the science of it, but the secret. What if those two simple letters on your medical chart, the ones no one pays much attention to, A, B, AB, or O, were not mere clinical designations, but the first letters of a story your soul has been trying to tell you? What if blood is not just substance but symbol? We've been taught to think of blood as a liquid, a number in a test result, a category on a donation card. But look again. Across every culture, every epoch, blood has never been just blood. It has been covenant, curse, inheritance, offering. We swear by it. We spill it. We bind ourselves to others with it. We call it holy and we call it war. Carl Jung would have called this a symbol of the collective unconscious, the place where personal memory fades into myth, where the individual dissolves into the human. And in this mythic register, blood is not just what runs through you. It is what has been running through all of us for as long as we've walked the earth. He never wrote directly about blood types, but Jung's work was never about the surface. It was about what moves beneath it. He believed that symbols arise not because we invent them, but because we need them. Because they are how the soul speaks when language fails. And blood, simple, red, persistent, is one of the oldest symbols we have. In Japan, this symbolic understanding of blood became something more structured. Kedukigata, a theory suggesting that your blood type corresponds with patterns in your personality, your temperament, even your relationships. It may not meet the standards of empirical science, but then again, not all truths live in laboratories. Some truths live in dreams, in rituals, in the quiet pull you feel towards certain people, certain choices, certain pains. What if, as Jung might ask, Kedukigata survives not because it's factually provable, but because it touches something archetypal, something that feels true in a language deeper than logic? So today, we begin not with the science, but with the symbol. We don't ask what blood type you are to predict your future, but to trace the fingerprint of the archetype that may be living, dormant, or awake inside your veins. We are not here to label you. We are here to see what your blood might be trying to show you, about your patterns, your gifts, your shadows. What if your blood type is not a box, but a key? A key that opens not doors outside you, but the ones you've locked inside yourself. Not to say who you are with certainty, but to gently ask, have you met this part of you yet? And so the journey begins. Not into charts or diagnostics, but into the myth of your biology. The feeling in your gut you couldn't name. The impulse you've always had but never understood. The wound you carry that might not have started with you. Look closer. The blood still flows, and perhaps it speaks. There are people in this world whose presence feels like silence. Not emptiness, but a kind of stillness that calms the room when they enter. They are rarely the loudest voice, yet you feel them. They don't interrupt, but they notice. They don't demand space, but they quietly shape it. If you were to look closely, you'd see the careful arrangement of their lives. Objects placed just so, moments planned, thoughts measured before they are spoken. There is nothing accidental about how they move. They are curators of balance in a world that is rarely still. Type A blood type perhaps, but also a signal, a symbol, not of a category but of a temperament, a frequency of being. In Jungian language, they are often touched by the archetype of the sage, the one who seeks order not for control but for understanding, the one who looks inward not to escape but to see more clearly. And yet behind the surface of their meticulousness, there is often something else, a kind of tremor beneath the calm, a quiet fear that if they stop tending to the order, the chaos will come. The world praises them. It sees their structure, their reliability, their loyalty, and rewards them with roles of responsibility. They are the organizers, the caretakers, the builders of systems. But Jung would ask us to look deeper, to ask what it costs to be so composed, to wonder what it takes to maintain the stillness they offer others. Behind the order there is often a shadow, not a flaw, but a hidden weight. Jung reminds us that every archetype has its opposite, its dark twin. For the sage, for the type A soul, the shadow is the unspoken fear of disorder, not just in the world but in themselves. They often live with a quiet belief that their value depends on getting things right, on anticipating the next disaster before it arrives. And so they plan, they fix, they arrange and rearrange. But sometimes, beneath all of it, is the ache of never feeling quite enough. Have you ever met someone who apologizes for things that don't need apology? Who says sorry as a reflex, even when they've done nothing wrong? That's not politeness. That's the echo of the inner critic, a voice that has learned to scan every moment for flaws not in others but in themselves. For the type A soul, rest can feel like failure, spontaneity a risk, disorder a threat. And yet this very discomfort reveals something sacred, because it is here, in the tension between control and surrender, that individuation begins. Jung never told us to eliminate our patterns. He invited us to make them conscious, to look at the roles we play, the faces we wear, and ask, is this truly me? For the type A, the journey inward begins not by dismantling their need for order, but by softening its grip, by realizing that order can be an offering, but it doesn't have to be a prison. There is deep beauty in a mind that sees patterns others miss, in a heart that remembers birthdays, that folds clothes with care, that builds a world where people feel safe. But that gift becomes whole only when it is freed from the fear that something will collapse if they stop holding it all together. Many who carry this pattern describe a quiet transformation as they grow older. The inner critic grows gentler. The need for perfection loosens its hold. They begin to allow the mess, the moment, the mystery. And in doing so, they don't lose themselves. They become more themselves. There is a grace in someone who can hold structure without becoming rigid, who can bring order without erasing complexity. The evolved type A is not a rule follower, they are a wisdom keeper. Not because they know everything, but because they've learned how to listen. To themselves, to others, to silence. So if you are one of them, or if you carry a little of their rhythm in your own blood, know this: you are not your discipline, you are not your routines, you are the quiet breath behind them. And even when you let go, the world will not fall apart. Sometimes, it is in the falling apart that something truer begins. You do not have to earn rest. You do not have to fix everything to deserve peace. Let your blood carry not the pressure to be perfect, but the permission to be whole. Because the sage is not born from perfection. The sage is born from seeing clearly and choosing gently. Where some build walls and draw blueprints to feel safe, others tear down fences to see what lies beyond the horizon. Type B walks barefoot along the edges of maps, half in the known, half in the unknown, chasing something not because they're lost, but because they've always known that the road never ends. There is a certain wind that lives in them, a current, a hum, something inside that resists boxes, roles, definitions. They are not easily contained and not easily understood. People may call them spontaneous, non-committal, distracted, as if to say their rhythm is a mistake. But to live without anchor is not the same as being adrift. Some souls are not made for harbors. They are made for the open sea. Type B does not simply react to life. They move with it. While Type A builds the structure, Type B listens for the pulse beneath it. They are guided less by plans and more by scent, by intuition, by a sense that meaning isn't made through control, but through immersion, through experience, through touching the world with raw hands and saying yes before the mind has time to hesitate. In Jungian terms, this is the archetype of the explorer, not the conqueror, not the tourist, but the one who seeks because the seeking is holy, the one who carries 1,000 beginnings inside of them, each whispering a different direction. For the explorer, commitment is not the endpoint. It is the tension they live with every day. Because to choose one path is to close another, and their heart was never meant to live in one room forever. But here, too, the shadow lives. Jung would remind us that every gift comes with a cost, every light with a shadow. And for the type B soul, that shadow is rootlessness, the inability to stay, the fear of stagnation that becomes a refusal to sink into anything that might require stillness. There are times when their freedom becomes avoidance, when the dance with possibility turns into a flight from depth. You may know someone like this, someone whose eyes light up with every new idea but dim at the thought of long-term repetition. Someone who leaves before they're seen too clearly, not out of malice, but out of fear that clarity will cage them. These are the ones who don't want to be tamed, but secretly long for someone to see the parts of them they don't even understand. Their growth does not come from abandoning their wildness. It comes from learning how to carry it with intention, how to stay in one place long enough to let something root, without believing they've betrayed who they are. Maturity for the explorer is not about slowing down. It is about choosing movement that nourishes, not distracts. Type B lives in contrast. They are both fire and mist. They crave novelty but are capable of great loyalty if they are met in their truth. If they are loved not for who others want them to be, but for who they are when the masks fall away. When you see them not as flaky but as fluid, not as inconsistent but as a mosaic of instincts, fragments, visions that have yet to cohere into a single shape. In the workplace, they often thrive where systems need imagination, where old methods have failed, where connection and creativity matter more than metrics. They can see links where others see separation. They bring people together not through force, but through presence, through that unspoken sense that here, in this moment, anything is possible. They have a gift for reminding others how to breathe again, to play again, to wonder. But the explorer's journey doesn't end in freedom. It begins there. The deeper path, the path of individuation, asks more of them. Not to give up the wind, but to learn how to navigate by stars, not just impulse. To recognize when a desire is real and when it's just fear dressed as restlessness. To stay, even when staying feels like surrender. And when they do, something beautiful happens. The same soul that once ran from depth begins to carry it, not as a burden but as a compass. They still move, but now with clarity. They still change, but no longer as escape. They still feel the pull of what's next, but they don't forget who they've become along the way. To love a type B soul is to love a tide. To walk with them is to release expectation. But if you do, if you really do, you'll discover that their loyalty is not about time, but about presence. When they are with you, they are entirely with you. They may not stay forever, but while they are here, they will remind you how to live. So if your blood carries this rhythm, don't try to tame it, but don't let it scatter you either. You are not a storm to be feared. You are a force to be shaped. And somewhere in between the maps you've burned and the ones you've yet to draw is a place where you belong, not because you stayed, but because you arrived fully. And that is enough. There are souls who walk not on solid ground, but on the border between opposites. They do not live fully in one place, nor belong entirely to another. Instead, they dwell in the in-between, between thought and feeling, logic and intuition, order and chaos. They are not fragmented, but they are complex, not confused, but vast. And often they are misunderstood not because they are unclear, but because they reflect too many truths at once. Type OB, a confluence, not a compromise. The union of antigens that, in symbolic terms, creates a body where the dualities of the human experience coexist. These individuals often feel as though they are translating between two languages, between the inner and outer world, the past and the present, the need for solitude and the longing for connection. They are not one thing, they are many. And this, too, is sacred. Jung would have seen in them the archetype of the mediator, the one whose very existence challenges the illusion that opposites must remain separate. The mediator doesn't resolve polarity by choosing a side. They hold both. They understand that to be fully human is to carry contradiction not as a burden, but as a form of integrity. Yet even this gift is not without its cost. To stand in the middle is to be exposed from all directions. To see from every angle can feel like a kind of blindness, because clarity becomes diluted in a sea of perspectives. For the type Ob soul, the challenge is not external conflict, but internal dissonance. They hear too many voices within themselves, each one valid, each one true, each one pulling in a different direction. At times, they become masters of adaptation, chameleons shifting to meet the emotional weather of those around them. They can read a room like a poem, sense what others need before it's spoken. But this sensitivity, while beautiful, often leaves them unanchored. Because while they're tending to the languages of everyone else, they can forget how their own voice sounds. They are often described as enigmatic, not because they hide, but because people rarely ask the right questions. What they most long for is not to be admired, but to be understood, not for the masks they can wear, but for the multiplicity they carry beneath. There is something almost alchemical about them. The way they can merge ideas, blend emotions, navigate contradiction without forcing resolution. In the workplace, they're often the bridge between departments, the ones who can translate between artists and analysts, between vision and execution. In relationships, they're deeply intuitive, sometimes even psychic in how they attune to others. But they also struggle to define their own needs, because their gift for seeing others is sometimes stronger than their ability to see themselves. To the world, they might seem mysterious, but inside they often feel exposed, raw, open to too much, too fast, and in that exposure lies their deepest trial, how to remain whole while being many. Individuation for the type Ob soul is not about integration of opposites. They are already living proof that integration is possible. Their path is subtler. It's about anchoring, about finding a center that isn't neutral but true. A voice that belongs to them, not as a compromise between extremes, but as the song that emerges when all parts finally harmonize. This is not an easy journey, because the world often demands clarity, definition, allegiance to one side. But the type Ob soul cannot, will not, abandon the fullness of who they are just to make others comfortable. Their medicine is found not in answers but in presence, not in categories but in complexity. To love someone with this type is to love a prism, to see that one light can create many colors, and that the presence of many doesn't mean the absence of one. When a type Ob person begins to trust that they don't need to resolve their contradictions, something extraordinary happens. They stop seeking external permission to be what they already are. They begin to speak not with certainty but with depth, not with simplicity but with resonance. They become the mirror through which others see their own wholeness, not as perfection, but as a permission to be messy, layered, and alive. So if this is you, if your blood carries both the quiet of the sage and the fire of the explorer, if your heart holds both discipline and surrender, if your voice sometimes fractures under the weight of too many truths, know this. You are not meant to fit cleanly into the world's systems. You are meant to reveal the cracks in them, and in those cracks light enters. You are not lost between two worlds. You are the bridge. There are people whose presence feels like gravity, dense, unshakable, rooted in something older than reason. When they walk into a room, something shifts, as if the atmosphere has been made solid. They do not always speak first, but when they do, their words cut through fog like blade through mist. Type O is not subtle. It was never meant to be. There is something ancient in this blood, something that remembers before memory. Jung might call it a psychic echo from the collective unconscious, a pulse that ties the modern self to the first human who ever stood and chose to fight instead of flee. The hero lives here. Not in costume, not in glory, but in instinct, in that split-second readiness to act when others pause. Type O carries the archetype of the warrior. They do not question when action is required. They move. They do not ask for permission. They intervene. In a world dulled by indecision, their clarity is both their weapon and their offering. They have no tolerance for hesitation when lives are at stake, when truth needs defending, when the ground beneath others begins to shake. Where others deliberate, they leap. But with this clarity comes danger, because the sword that protects can also cut, and the fire that warms can consume. Jung knew that any archetype, when unintegrated, becomes distorted. The warrior, unchecked, can become tyrant. The hero, unexamined, can become addict, addicted to victory, addicted to motion, addicted to control. For the type O soul, the battle is not always outside. Often, the fiercest conflict lives within. The need to fight versus the need to feel. The impulse to conquer versus the vulnerability of letting go. You may recognize them by their posture, the way they hold themselves, always slightly forward, as if they're about to launch into something. You may see it in the way they take charge, not to dominate, but because they believe if they don't, no one will. There is nobility in this, but there is also weight. To be the strong one is to be the one who rarely gets to fall apart. Type O is often tasked with leading, even when they never asked to. And in this, they are both admired and isolated. People come to them for strength but forget they too bleed. That beneath the armor is not just muscle, but a heart that longs to be held, not only respected. To be seen, not only followed. Individuation for the hero is a paradox. It asks them to do the one thing they've always avoided. Stop fighting. Not to surrender in defeat, but to learn the quiet strength of reflection. To recognize that not every challenge must be met head-on. That some battles are invitations to listen. That sometimes retreat is not cowardice, it is wisdom. And when they do pause, when they learn to breathe instead of charge, something remarkable happens. They become not only the sword but the shield, not only the fighter but the healer. They begin to realize that real power is not force but presence. That clarity doesn't mean rigidity, it means truth spoken without harm. Type O, when balanced, is a force of nature. They become the fire that gives light without burning, the mountain that stands not to block but to anchor. In relationships, they offer direction, protection, and unwavering commitment, but only if they've learned to temper their impulse to fix everything through action. Sometimes, holding space is the braver act. To love a type O soul is to be loved by someone who will fight for you, even when you won't fight for yourself. But it is also to learn how to meet their intensity with calm, to help them remember that peace is not the absence of struggle, it is the presence of stillness, chosen, not enforced. So if this is your rhythm, if your blood burns with the memory of battle, know that you are not wrong for your clarity. You are not broken because you want to move while others freeze. But ask yourself, what is the cost of always being the one who acts? What would it mean to trust that some answers come not through fire, but through silence? Not every sword needs to be drawn. Not every victory is won in motion. Sometimes, the truest strength is found in letting the fire warm your chest and choosing, for once, to stay still. Somewhere between science and myth, between the sterile report of your blood type and the trembling voice of your unconscious, there is a language the body speaks that the mind has forgotten how to read. A language not made of sentences but of symbols, not linear but archetypal. And in that language, A is not just A, B is not just B. These letters, so small and ordinary, carry the shape of something older, deeper, something that was never meant to diagnose but to whisper. We are taught that blood types are medical, that they tell us who we can receive from, who we can give to. But what if they tell us more than that? What if those same letters are also metaphors, archetypal signposts pointing toward parts of ourselves we've never fully seen? Jung wouldn't ask you to believe this literally. He would ask you to listen, not to the surface, but to what stirs beneath. Because what is individuation if not the lifelong work of remembering who we are beneath what we perform? What is healing if not making space for the parts of ourselves that have long been exiled? Our impulses, our contradictions, our secret longings. Each blood type we've touched carries with it not just traits but invitations. A rhythm, a wound, a gift. Type A with its sacred order and silent weight. Type B with its untamed joy and lonely drift. Type AB with its mirror of multiplicity, too much and not enough at once. Type O with its fire, its certainty, and the longing behind the armor. None of these are cages. None of them are fixed truths. They are openings, portals, ways to begin listening to the symbols already living in our veins. It would be easy to use these patterns to explain ourselves. To say, I'm like this because I'm type B, or they'll never understand me, they're type A, but that's not what this is. That's not what Jung would want. Archetypes are not excuses. They are invitations to see ourselves, to hold our patterns not as identities but as stories waiting to be rewritten. Shadow lives in all of them, and this is where the real work begins. Because knowing the archetype is not enough. We must look for its shadow. We must see where our gifts become compulsions, where our strengths become shields, where our personalities become prisons. We must ask, who am I when no one is watching? What part of me have I silenced to fit the image of what I think I should be? The journey of becoming whole is not about polishing the surface. It is about walking back into the forgotten rooms of the psyche, the ones filled with dust and memory and half-finished thoughts, the ones we locked away because they didn't fit the roles we were taught to play. That is where our humanity lives. And that is where our blood, metaphorically or otherwise, has always tried to guide us. You may never know whether your blood type shaped your personality or whether your soul simply chose that pattern to inhabit. It doesn't matter. What matters is that you're here now, standing on the edge of recognition, holding in your hands the alphabet of your becoming. Because this isn't about blood, it's about attention, and what we attend to grows. So listen, not just with your mind, but with your breath, with the part of you that has always known there was more than what you were told. Let these letters become symbols. Let the archetypes become mirrors. Let the shadows become maps. And perhaps for the first time, you'll see that you are not who you thought you were. You are something far more vast, and the journey is just beginning. Some truths do not arrive as answers. They arrive as questions that never leave you. And long after this video ends, long after the last word fades and the images dissolve, something will still remain. A quiet rhythm, a pulse not in your chest but in your memory. Your blood is still flowing, and so is your becoming. You may return to your day, your routines, the names you wear and the roles you fulfill, but perhaps something has shifted. Perhaps a corner of your inner world has been lit with a softer kind of light, one that doesn't blind but reveals, one that doesn't impose but invites. This journey was never about blood types. It was about you, about what you do with the small clues life leaves inside you, about whether you listen when the body speaks in symbol, when the soul stirs without words, about whether you dare to ask the question most people spend their lives avoiding. Who am I beneath all this? Beneath the habits, beneath the systems, beneath even the archetypes. Who are you when the labels fall away? Jung once wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Not who others believe you should be. Not even who you believed you had to be in order to survive. But who you are when the masks are placed gently on the table, and all that remains is the quiet, luminous fact of your own aliveness. You are not your blood type, but maybe, just maybe, it was trying to show you something. Not a destiny, a direction, not a definition, a doorway. And now you stand in front of it. Do you walk through? Or do you return to the safety of the known? That is not a question I can answer for you. It is one only you can live. But know this, wherever you go, you are not alone. The pulse within you is not yours alone. It is part of something older, vaster, shared. The collective unconscious, the great tapestry, the dream of being human. So walk slowly, speak gently, and listen for the voice beneath the voice. Because the self you've been searching for may not speak in words. It may speak in silence, in symbol, in blood, and if you can still yourself long enough to hear it, you may realize the journey never ends. It only deepens.